we call them different things, but I think the very first thing is you need to find people who buy into your vision. And so it's got to quickly get from you and your family to a core group. And the core group become ministry partners to the point where they're willing to cast vision to their friends and unchurched relatives or whatever, so that they're also, they're the ones who are doing the evangelizing. They're also working shoulder to shoulder with the planter. So it goes from the planter to a small group to a larger group and kind of moves out in concentric circles. So the very first thing a planter needs to do is to be able to share their vision, what they sense God is calling them to do, enough times and with enough people that they get buy-in. And that those people embrace that vision and begin to cast it as well. At this point, we're not developing committees, we're not developing systems and structures. We really are developing relationships, and we're trying to gather as many people as we can who buy into this, who will be on the journey. And the strategies various churches will use for planting vary greatly. Again, it could be a house church, it could be a mother-daughter, a parachute drop. There's about 11 different strategies right now that are being utilized in one form or another in Methodism, and that's going to determine whether you start with a small group based model before you get to worship, or you start with worship and you develop an attractional model where you draw people into worship and then try and move them into small groups. But I think as you're building relationships and gathering a team, I think the discussions, hopefully with a very good coach who would also be a part of this equation, would help you to figure out who are the people we're trying to reach, what are their needs, what is it going to take to reach them, what strategy is going to prepare us to do that best, and to do that together as a group, and then begin to line out kind of a timeline, a process. Where do we start? What do we add? Where's this thing going, especially like in year 1 and year 2. I think as many as many people like me or superintendents and others who can support planters and their teams early on. I just had a what I call a stakeholders meeting with a church planter this weekend, and I had two superintendents who were related to this person's project, the church planter, myself, and the senior pastor of the church that launched them. And the conversation, which I would intentionally see it the first 6 months, then 12 months, and then 18 months, we gathered that group together to meet with the planter to say, how's it going? Are things unfolding the way you thought they were going to unfold? How are you measuring success or fruitfulness? What are your benchmarks? What's the criteria that you're using to measure that? And is it working? And if not, what strategies do we need to change in order to kind of keep this thing on the rails? I think that group working with the planter is the one that's constantly developing the strategic plan and the timeline and the unfolding of this thing. But it's not left just to the planter to do that.
Well, it started obviously with casting a vision with a group of people, and I had some folks that made a commitment to, that said we're in on this vision, a small group of people. But as we began to prepare, we began to have some small group meetings, praying about what we were doing, the direction that we were moving, kind of sharing word of mouth where we were going and how we were getting there. And then we, in our instance here, we had a piece of property, we had a building. We wanted to move forward with getting the place ready. Okay, this is what I think worship's going to look like. This is the kind of setting that we're trying to create. This is the kind of atmosphere that we're after to help people kind of lower their guards. And that turned into action of preparing the property, preparing the grounds. Then you move into, I have a marketing background. The last thing I was going to do was spend any money in marketing and advertising, because the cool thing about building into the DNA of a new faith community is this idea of evangelism. And the number one way that you can gain the resources of people, is to have folks invite. And so we took some time getting out into the local community here and just doing some visiting with folks, door hangers, all kinds of different ways to let folks know that, okay, on X date, September the 16th, 2007, we're going to have a launch service for everyone. And we did some other creative things that leaned into some marketing directions. We wrote some press releases. We leaned into the media a little bit. We actually put together a magazine called Edge of the Margin, had some folks write stories sharing their own life experiences that kind of identified with the people we were targeting. We distributed those free to folks, so that was also a way of casting the vision. And then we had our launch date on Sunday, and the week or two leading up to that, we just kind of heavily started inviting folks. It's kind of like that pay it forward concept. When one person, shares something with another person, then they share it with 2 or 3 people. It's amazing what can happen. And so we went from originally 13 people kind of sharing in a vision and meeting together and preparing a place for launch to 3 months later and a launch date of 137 people in the first worship service. And so that momentum continued to carry on because we continued that activity of inviting and moving to the next level and casting the next vision to the point where the next Easter, which was really 6 months away, we already had to go to 2 worship services. So it's a matter of what you put into motion, and the steps that you're taking really never end. You just kind of keep capitalizing on those, and it's going to look different for every situation. Now that took out of that didn't take into consideration much of the activity that has to take place on the district level or the conference level in terms of progress and what might we need to support this launch, or the things you have to take into consideration, the logistical things like, okay, if you're going to do multimedia, how are you going to get it up on the screen? Those kind of things happen naturally as you're casting vision and as you're building relationships. People say, well, I have this, or I can offer this, or I can do this. So it's not just about people. It's about noticing people's gifts and how they plug in to the community of faith. I mean, that's the emergence of the body of Christ. And so when you give room for that and you just get out of the way and you keep pointing in the right direction, it kind of just happens naturally. It's strange, man. It's just, it's fun. It's energizing. It's scary. But you're learning what the next step's going to look like because you're trusting in the vision that God has revealed, and people faithfully step out into that. If they've got a leader, you've got somebody pointing in a direction, really cool things can happen.
So it's interesting now to be here and look back, 4 years and see how God used all those parts and pieces to lead us in that, making that vision reality. But money, facilities, and support of a mother-daughter relationship or some kind of symbiotic relationship. And honestly, you've got to be, the one thing you need to make vision become reality is flexibility and courage. There's not one thing, it's 2. Flexibility and courage, because the vision, whereas the vision of who doesn't change, the how, oh my gosh. I mean, really, it changes sometimes by the hour. And you just can't think you have all the answers, because you don't, and I don't, and they change, and you've got to just see where God is leading and be willing to go there, because God will always, God does, go before us, but we have the opportunity to choose to follow or not. Our vision changed. Adam Hamilton told us, you start with a concrete vision. If you want to stay at campus, claim it. Say, we want to stay at campus. If you want to become a church, say, we want to eventually become a church. And we did not do that. We're like, well, we'll just wait and see. And we talked about it a lot, Rob and I, and Mark Jordan, the executive director there at Williamson's Chapel. And Mark was there with Adam Hamilton when we met, and he's like, I really think we need to say one way or another. And Rob was like, no, I don't. I think we need to just be vague, and we'll just see what happens. And I think that set us up for some difficulty and how it came to fruition because we didn't claim it at the beginning. So the church people did not know. The West people did not know. What's our goal? There was no goal other than to just make sure some people come. And I mean, we didn't have any benchmarks. We didn't have any of that you need to make a vision become reality, because you have to know what you're working toward. And so for us, it was just to get people to come and engage in taking steps deeper in their walk with Christ. And we were 6 months old, and Rob called me and wanted to meet. And he's like, I feel like God's leading me to a different place right now. And so he moved. And we were 6 months old. And luckily, or God, you can say God or luck, we started, he said, pretend you've got some money, some people, or some money, and you go find people, place, all that. You make it happen. We're going to give you some money. And we did. And God did lead people.
801 South is an extension or a ministry of Matthews United Methodist Church. So where most churches who want to do multi-site or want to plant a new church, what they typically do is they take the DNA or the culture of the home church and they just simply plant that in another place that has a viable population. This is kind of the opposite, where we have taken the DNA and the culture of Matthews, but we've added something of a very different DNA and culture on the same site. So we are one church, one mission, but it's a separate venue, which with a small group component for the sake of intentional community. The key in moving from an idea to an actual reality is just simply having a bias for action. So it's just a matter of putting one foot in front of the other. Because when you initially have this vision, you see it in your mind, you see it in your heart, and as it comes together, it doesn't necessarily look like that vision that you saw in your mind. So what you do is you just keep working, you keep moving forward, you keep putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually it starts to come together and you start to see tangible results. And you just continue to work and continue to push forward, and even when things don't go as planned or they don't go as expected, you don't allow that to stop you. So as long as you keep the momentum moving forward, and again, just having a bias for action. So you don't let the research stop you. You research as you go, but you don't say, we're not going to start until we have so much research. We're not going to start until we have so much education. We're not going to start until we have so many resources. You just simply start. And you just keep going. You just keep moving forward. That's been the one key. The other great resource that we have had here is, again, the coach. So the coaching and the consulting that has come alongside of us, and somebody that I can just call on the phone and bounce ideas off of, and they provide some templates as far as developing a launch team and others, and we tweak those and adjust those to our context and to our values. But somebody that I can send an email to and just say, hey, we're struggling through this, we're wrestling through this, what do you suggest, what is your advice in this? Somebody who's been there and done that and has come alongside for this journey with us.
I've often said the most important benchmark is, can this thing stand on its own 2 feet? When you're a parent, you give birth to a child that you eventually hope becomes independent of you. Still in a relationship, it can kind of care for itself. And you want that for the churches that we plant as well. And that may happen sooner than later for some. It depends on the model and strategy. Some of the missional church plants that we're doing that are reaching population groups that are homeless or based more on the recovery movement are probably going to take a little longer to develop to the point of that kind of viability and sustainability than a mother-daughter church, where the mother church or the parent church has more resources to pour into them and people resources to kind of get them up and running faster. But it really depends on the strategy that's employed and deployed. But the goal really is, can this thing survive without a lot of outside resources being pumped in?
When you do cast a vision and you do have clarity on which direction you're going, you're also going to attract all kinds of different folks. And when you attract all kinds of different folks have all kinds of different ideas. And so many of the challenges early on are to stay on track with the vision and direction, to stay in tune with God and to stay in stride with God. Because you're going to get all kinds of people coming up to you and say, hey, it would be great if we did this. Or, hey, I know the church needs some money. I'll give you some money, but I want it to be used for this. And if you're not careful, you will discover that you end up with a lot of people that have come from other churches. They may be a little frustrated with other churches that they come from, and they have an agenda or want to move in a specific direction. And you've got to be able to, number one, stay on task and stay on track with the vision and the direction you're moving, but also minister to those folks and help them work through the things that they're working through. So while in our community of faith we didn't have any major thing that got us off track, we did have a lot of ideas from a lot of people that were coming through the doors that could have been a distraction if you didn't have clarity on the direction you were moving. And that requires having a really good core team. It's not just the pastor. It's a core group of folks that you start out with. That core group of folks actually becomes the skeleton in a couple of years of what will emerge as the administrative council. So these are people that you discern are spiritually growing, and they're committed to what's going on, and they will also help keep things on track. There's always going to be a curveball here and there that you have to work through. It's inevitable, but when you've got a little bit of clarity and you've got people on board with the direction you're moving, you can kind of work through those things.
The Cove told us that you need to plan on losing half of your launch team. And I thought, there's no way. And the guy said, their executive director of all the campuses, he said, you need to be prepared to lose half of the people, and the people that stay will be willing to die on the hill for the vision. And if they're not willing to die on the hill for the vision, then they don't need to stay. And I thought, well, that's nice of you to say that, sitting here with your campus of 350 or 500 or however many people you have on Sunday morning. We've got about 40, and I'm not real sure how you think we're going to lose half of those and still be able to do this, and I'm not sure it's really ready to die on a hill, but okay. And, I guess it was about last year, I was looking through some old files, and I found a paper where I had written down the names of all the people that were on the launch team, over time. And sure enough, half of them weren't there when we finally went to launch. And but we're here. And a year ago, we chartered as a church because Rob moved. And so there was a period of time that Williamson's Chapel did not have a senior pastor because appointments had already been set in the cabinet. The bishop really wanted to do this the right way and not just rush. And so from May to October, there was not an acting senior pastor. And so I'd never been a pastor. I'd never been a pastor before. I'd never had a finance committee. I've never been to a finance committee meeting, and would have been fine to have never gone to one either. But, that's another story. And so we prayed about it a lot and talked to the bishop and the cabinet, and they all felt like if you have 200, it's fine. Go on. You can charter as a church. And so within 3 months of that conversation, we chartered, which is insane. It's insane. Again, never been to a finance committee meeting, much less run one. Trustees, no clue. I'd never asked for members before because one of the things that people get turned off about churches is, the push to join, and what are you joining? And we try not to be an institution. We try to be a movement. Jesus didn't have an institution that he was about. He was the way. They were called followers of the way. The church came later. And so whereas we are a faith community and a church, we're trying to do it organically, if you want to use that word. And so we chartered with nothing. Didn't know how many people would be a member. Sat in the bishop's office and cried. I'm like, I don't know what you expect, but I'm not sure we're going to meet it. How many people do we have to have? And he said, well, how many do you think you're going to have? I'm like, I don't know. I said, what do you think like you would have? He's like, and he was kind though, and he answered all my questions. He said, well, how about 200? I thought I was going to throw up. We're just right there, and tears streaming down. I don't think we're going to have 200. 150? I don't think so. And we just kept dropping the number, and he finally said, we have to have 75 per book of discipline. And I'm like, And he goes, or we can look at some other options. He was so nice, but I was so wigged out. It was like the week before Christmas when we met, and I just didn't know. I was terrified, because it's one thing to be a campus. It's another thing to be a church.
I've done this twice, and the first time nearly wrecked my marriage. You know, and this is a common thing I meet with church planters. This over-identification and over-sense of responsibility, and I get it, because you're starting this thing. It's high risk. People are watching you. They're counting on you for this thing to be a success. And you feel like you can't take a day off or a block of time off, or this thing will go careening out of control. And what it causes you to do is to think that if I only work harder at this, or if I only spend more time at this, then maybe that's what's going to make it thrive, when it's not. Because ultimately it's not about me, it's about how I reproduce myself and others. And that's hard. For me it was not really understanding the prices that you pay to be a church planter. And even doing it the second time was actually harder than the first for me, which surprised me, because I thought, gosh, I've learned all this stuff, I've fixed some things, and it was still just hard. And I've said to folks, if you don't believe in the power of evil or the force of darkness at work in the world, then plant a church, because you'll figure it out pretty quickly. And that's not to over-spiritualize it, but man, it seems like there's everything in heaven, or not in heaven, but on earth and below earth, that just kind of mounts against us. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, times 10. And existing churches don't want you around. Other pastors become threatened by you as a church planter. The United Methodist Connection doesn't fully understand it. Boards of ordained ministry aren't always supportive of the work that we do. So you're really kind of out there on your own, and you've got to find your support, and you've got to find systems and other people who can be part of the process with you.
You need to have prayer partners that pray for that launch and for that entity once a day, and they teach you to get at least 5 people that have nothing to do with it, not your family, not your church people, not anybody that you have in your close proximity. Find people that are earnestly going to pray for you, that have no vested interest other than kingdom interest.
One of the neat things about this project that we're working on here, this new ministry, is that we hired a consultant and a coach to come alongside. So I have a coach who is out of Chicago and has a business there called Intentional Impact. And he works with businesses and churches for leadership development and reproducing ministries. And so he's been coaching me through this. He also has had a lot of experience with multi-site churches in the past. And he's also come alongside the rest of the church from here at Matthews United Methodist Church as a consultant to work with the rest of the staff. So one thing that I heard was that a lot of times only the person leading the new ministry gets the coaching, but nobody else really is coached or consulted along the way. So we felt like it was important to bring somebody alongside as the content expert that could help everybody involved, from the existing staff to the new people that are leading this ministry as well.
And interestingly enough, one of the staff people at this megachurch and I had the opportunity to work together with some missional things. She was the missions pastor there, and huge respect for her. And so that megachurch ended up mentoring us and let us come up to their Statesville campus, watch how they did the trailers, watch how they rolled everything in, and within 2 hours, it was like magical transformation, and you transform a high school into a gym. They gave us their specs on what they paid for things. It was amazing and such a gift.
Not being able to equip others and develop leadership early on is probably one of the strong failings of a church early on. Naivete from the very beginning of thinking, we're going to do ministry this way. Somewhere down the line, the planner realizing they really don't have the passion and affinity for the group that they thought they were there to reach. I think most of the failures happen because there weren't enough people early enough in the process to think through all the things that needed to happen. And again, that begins with not just the pastor, but a launch team. And a good coach being a part of that conversation, a person like me, a district superintendent, is broader ownership, where we're working on the project together. The more isolated a planter is, and the more insulated a planter is, the more dangerous the situation is, as far as I'm concerned. It is not a solo act. It really is a team sport. And I think beyond that, there are a lot of stupid things that people can do to get in the way of their church plant. I mean, there really are. There's like a guy by the name of Jim Griffith wrote a book called 10 Common Mistakes Church Planters Make, or something like that. And they're all common sense kinds of things. We just don't think through them well enough before we start. We want to be the next Bill Hybels, and so we start acting like Willow Creek when we're not Willow Creek.
Yeah, that's the funny thing, is this is all one big challenge.
Right.
So, which is one of the things that for me makes it a lot of fun, because again, we're not really taking a model that someone else has used and applying it here. I actually have not been able to find a single church anywhere that's doing exactly what we're trying to do, as far as a new venue plus a new way of looking at ministry. So it's been really interesting, but in that we've been able to take from different models. So we've been able to take from different sources and apply here what we learned from different churches, different communities of faith. And so a lot of people look at it from the outside or superficially, and they think, well, they must have had a special sauce in there somewhere, they must have really had the key. And what you find when you hear a lot of people tell their stories is they just figured it out as they went, that they were just putting one foot in front of the other, and then all of a sudden they realized it had all come together and God was doing incredible work and was really blessing their efforts.
Vision becoming a reality. It's those core foundational pieces, and then just a willingness to just be flexible and not be a chicken. I mean, I'm a chicken. I'm a giant chicken. And on the surface. But then really at the end of the day, in my core, I just know that God's got my back. And so courage and boldness to make vision become a reality, you got to know. You got to know it's what you're called to do, and you got to know that it's going to be hard, and that when it's hard, you don't get to give up.